Here we go. You think there's no more bubbles to come? Well, President Trump has one for you. The Trump administration helped hide a report where Wells Fargo screwed students with already large student loan debt. For months, the Trump administration hid a report showing that banks charge high fees to college students who opened accounts and held debit cards, and that Wells Fargo charged more on average than any other financial institution. The report, which was done by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, was only released publicly only last week after consumer advocacy groups submitted a Freedom of Information request for the document. A copy was sent from the agency to the Department of Education in February. Seth Frotman, the former student loan ombudsman at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, had accused agency heads of burying the report when he quit in protest earlier this year. When new evidence came to light showing the nation's largest banks were ripping off students on campuses across the country by saddling them with legally dubious account fees, Bureau leadership suppressed the publication of a report prepared by Bureau staff, Frotman wrote in his resignation letter. The report reviewed accounts at nearly 600 colleges that had partnered with banks for student promotions. Some banks paid colleges based on the number of students who opened the accounts, the report said. Though most students who signed up for these accounts did so without accruing fees, certain banks, quote, pose a risk to student consumers, according to the report. Financial institutions that did not pay colleges for promotion charged $11.93 in account fees on average over a 12-month period. But students paid an average of $36.52 in fees to banks that paid colleges for their sponsorship. Students who had accounts with Wells Fargo paid the most, an average of almost $47. You notice how every single recent scandal is Wells Fargo and absolutely nobody goes to jail? Wells Fargo spokesperson Jim Sates said that average costs vary by school. He added that some students may have more fee-eligible banking needs, like sending wires or purchasing more checks. What an excuse. Oh my God, that's a terrible, terrible rationale. There is no indication in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau report that Wells Fargo disproportionately serviced more students with such needs. The average is based on 30 colleges that had partnerships with Wells Fargo and reported the required data. Wells Fargo waives monthly service fees on primary checking accounts for those between the ages of 17 and 24. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau declined to comment. What a shock. You know, this kind of stuff that Trump is actually doing, this kind of stuff that actually affects your life that the Trump administration is doing, who the hell knows what Mick Mulvaney is doing at the Office of Budget? Who the hell knows what Rick Perry is doing at the Department of Energy? Who the hell knows what Ben Carson, that neuroscientist, is doing at HUD? Because all we're hearing about is Russia. All we hear about day after day, 24/7, is the Russian boogeyman. While Trump and his administration are literally covering up reports that show students are being scammed. And you might not be a student, but let me tell you something. The student loan debt, many experts say, is the next bubble that will take down the domestic and possibly global economy. So it does affect you when students are getting scammed on top of the student loan scam. Despite the economic recovery, student debtors' monster in the closet has only worsened. The student loan default rate more than doubled between 2003 and 2011, and 40% of borrowers are expecting to fall behind on their loans by 2023. It's going to be very consequential for the future of the country, says Barmak Nassirian, Director of Federal Relations for the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. In many ways, Daniel Strong is happy with life. He owns a 3-bedroom ranch style in Charlottesville, Virginia, where he lives with his wife and 3-year-old son. He recently made the last payment on his silver Toyota Tacoma. He likes his job. There's only one problem, and it won't go away. Strong and his wife owe more than $350,000 for their bachelor's and master's degree. The huge monster in the closet for me are these student loans that keep getting bigger and bigger. When they graduated, they were faced with monthly bills of around $800 and have since struggled to keep up. It's so stressful to think about the fact that you're probably going to have to work until you drop dead at work because of your student loans. 10 years after the 2008 financial crisis, there are headlines of record low unemployment and booming economy. Those are bullshit. Yet one area has only worsened over the decade and threatens that recovery: student debt. Average debt at graduation is currently around $30,000, up from $10,000 in the early 1990s. The country's outstanding student loan balance is projected to swell to $2 trillion by 2022, and experts say a large portion of it is unlikely to ever be repaid. Nearly a quarter of student loan borrowers are currently in a state of delinquency or default. Because of these loans, many Americans are unable to buy houses and cars, start businesses and families, or save or invest. Borrowing is unlikely to slow at any time, as the cost of an education in this country is only rising. Yes, because the educational colleges are also paying off our politicians. So our politicians let them price gouge students. State funding for public colleges fell by $9 billion between 2008 and 2017. I could read on, but the bottom line is this, folks: you don't need to be in college for this to affect you. And just so you know, if you were paying attention, or if you know anything about the 2008 global economic crash, the reason the housing market crashed, in addition to these criminal loans that were handed out to people that were not vetted, they didn't meet the basic criteria to get a mortgage loan. These toxic loans, I believe called collateralized debt obligations, were pooled together. So think of a Lego game or Jenga. All of these crappy loans were pulled together and packaged as one big piece of hot dog shit. And guess what? They're doing the same thing with student loans right now. I just spoke recently with someone in finance. They are literally packaging toxic student loans that students are defaulting on and can't pay, and selling those off not only to investors but to pension funds. So if you have a pension, you should look in if your pension is investing in student loans. And you know what? I interviewed Jill Stein several times during the campaign. I was one of the only person that traveled to cover her a little bit. Canceling out student loan debt is one of the best economic policies out there. It's never going to happen. We're too bought off by the banks. The politicians are too bought off by the banks. But if you want actual economic stimulus, bailing out the banks was not the way to go. Bailing out the students was the way to go. Because if you take the dark, dark cloud off students and ex-students who are now in their 40s or 50s and still have tens of thousands of dollars in student loans, or people fresh out of college in their 20s, 30s that have hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans, you take that off their backs, wow, they could actually spend more money of their monthly pay on going out to eat or buying things or taking a vacation, rather than spending the majority of their paychecks on student loans. Andy P. says, I get so much mail offering loan consolidations. It's such a racket. Bingo. Bluefire, 140,000 here. Bingo. I did a disappearing middle class tour when I was at the Young Turks. I interviewed a woman in Ohio. She had $400,000 of student loans. $400,000 of student loans. You better get a job where you're making a few mil. I don't cover Trump a lot, but this is on Trump. Trump didn't cause the housing market to crash, but the policies he's implementing right now, the cover-ups of reports like this, are going to cause another crash. This is 100% on President Trump, who's a little too busy tweeting and apparently worrying about, the walls closing in on him. But he's not here to legislate. He's not here to actually do good for his voters. He's here for the show and to be the star of the presidential reality show.